Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel, and today I have a doozy of a video for you guys because the interview is finally up. Tom Henderson interviewing Charlie Olson, who was basically the guy who created skill-based matchmaking for the Call of Duty franchise. Initially, they had an in-person interview that became an article, but now they sat down for an hour-long podcast where they discussed a lot of different aspects of the skill-based matchmaking system within the Call of Duty franchise, amongst a bunch of other things. Although I would like to lead the video off here with this. Charlie does make some good points throughout this podcast. I don't expect you guys to watch the entire hour-long thing, but if you want to, I'll put a link to it down there in the description. But in the podcast, he said this, which really kind of makes me question the validity of a lot of what he's saying.
Going back to some of the misconceptions there too, like people have this, when I was talking about rose-colored glasses, like, oh, but the old CODs didn't have SBMM and they retained players great. It's like, first of all, I don't think anybody has the true retention data. Like, you don't know what the active player counts were on the old CODs. Like, I don't know that Activision even knows that. So if somebody has that data, like, I would love to see it.
Charlie, it was right there. It was right there in the bottom left of every single game, year after year, on every single platform. They showed you how many players were playing because they were proud of how many players were playing, man. Like, I understand the idea that people have rose-tinted glasses for the old days, you know, but to say that sales do not equal retention is asinine when you're talking about the older Call of Duty games, because back then, they were organically fun. Back then, it was interesting, and you want to talk about the idea of retention, like, there's not microtransactions or anything, so where's the player retention? With no skill-based matchmaking and no microtransactions, why would people possibly want to sign in? Because the game was fun. Oh, and by the way, there were 4 map packs. They eventually had seasonal updates that eventually led to events like Shamrock Non, Winter Siege, and Days of Summer, and all the amazingness that we used to have in the COD franchise back when it was good. To say that we had no idea what the player numbers were like back then just really goes to show that you didn't really know much about the older Call of Duty titles. And also throughout the podcast, they sort of poked fun, like here and there, like little jabs now and then, talking about people using Steam numbers as a metric to measure the current Call of Duty player base. But at the same time, they never acknowledged things like Bobby Kotick under oath in court claiming that the current mainstream Call of Duty titles, not talking about mobile, but the actual COD that we all think of, more than half the player base is on PC. Recently, Microsoft revealed that PlayStation and Steam sales for Black Ops 6 were up over 60% compared to last year with Modern Warfare 3, and I do acknowledge it would be nice if we just saw the actual player count in the bottom left-hand side of our screen like we used to, but right now Steam is all we have to go off of, and trends on one platform are certainly going to be indicative of trends happening on other platforms to greater or lesser extents. I've talked about that countless times, but Charlie did make a pretty good point in that podcast. As often as we, the community, and pretty much everyone else out there, as often as we demonize Activision for being the greedy, evil company that they are, he made the point that do we believe that they would intentionally keep a system like skill-based matchmaking around if it was actually making them less money? Activision, for all their faults, they are good at one thing, and that's making money for the Call of Duty franchise one way or another. They're like the cockroaches of the games industry, where somehow, no matter what you do to them, they just never end up dying, and somehow they can turn a profit. Whether that is doing all these terrible collaborations like we're doing in Black Ops 6 with the Squid Game event, which was just freaking terrible. Like the final skin of the paid reward track had copy and pasted voice lines from another bundle that they pushed out as like a pre-order bonus or something like that.
I can't feel my face.
I can't feel my face.
Smooth. Too smooth.
Smooth. Too smooth.
Or even more recently with the St. Patrick's event, if you can even call it that, where they just reskin the Festive Archie event over and over and over, and the event itself is completely random and devoid of all soul whatsoever, and it just pales in comparison to what we used to have back in the day with Operation Shamrock Gnaw. I will say, going through the comments of yesterday's video, it was really heartwarming to see a lot of you guys talking about the good old days of even a game like Call of Duty World War II, because while that game doesn't seem like it came out that long ago, it's turning 8 years old this year. So yeah, it was really that long ago, and it's been that long since we've had proper good events here within the Call of Duty franchise. But he did make a point. Somehow Activision, they are the cockroaches of the games industry, and somehow they find a way to make money, and apparently skill-based matchmaking is part of that. But looking at the player numbers, which they tried to refute, it seems like more and more people are leaving the franchise, and that's also a point they covered in the podcast as well. He believes potentially that Activision are blind to things that they cannot measure, and we've talked about that a lot here on the channel as well. Is everything is data driven, right? Which you would think for a business that makes sense. sense, right? But everything is so data driven. They measure absolutely everything about you as a player and your metrics and your playtime. Like everything is just like so overly analytical now as compared to putting out a good organic game. They're trying to like game the game essentially, which is the reason why so many games recently just don't have that soul to them anymore. Like a lot of things are being run by AI and algorithms and being created by AI as well. The games themselves are not made by passionate nerds that just like military style video games and fast paced first person shooters. The games now are created by like these lizards in Silicon Valley that are sitting there like looking at their algorithms and their data tables and all that and trying to extract what is fun from the data of the people that are still playing their games. Like it's just such a dystopian way to go through and try to create video games and create art essentially when you're doing it that way. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But he did mention things like long-term players not returning or not purchasing new games or microtransactions because oftentimes they were replaced by new people. And even when a bunch of people are leaving the franchise for one reason or another, microtransaction sales are still going to be pretty good because of how much people end up spending on the game, which is likely why they went away from the old season pass model to begin with, right? Remember how excited we were going from a game like Black Ops 4 into Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019? It sounds crazy to say that in retrospect, but we were genuinely excited going into Modern Warfare 2019 because the idea was no more season passes, everything is going to be free, no more paying for map packs, loot boxes are gone, weapons are just going to be added to the game. They're going to bring back the battle pass model, but that's basically going to be the worst of it. Like we were pretty excited about that because at that day and age in 2018 going into 2019, I think a lot of us were very tired of the idea of a season pass. We were so sick and tired of like the Black Ops pass. I made countless videos on the Black Ops pass back in the day. That was like some big news back in Black Ops 4, but we had no idea how bad it was about to get due to Activision's greed, man. And it makes a lot of sense for them as a company, you know. Back then, people would buy the game for $60, and then typically a lot of people anyway would buy the season pass for $50, which means every person that bought the game spent $110. Well, they get rid of that season pass and even got rid of loot boxes, but then they put in the shop, and in the shop are just countless bundles that range from anywhere from $10, $20, $30, sometimes $40, and suddenly those people that are spending $110 per year on COD are spending like $300 on COD, $400, maybe even more. Like there's a $30 battle pass every single season for COD now, and people buy it for some reason. We're talking $180 a year on battle passes, not including the initial base entry fee of the game, and also not including all the shop bundles that they're likely purchasing as well. Like people are whales at this day and age, and Activision absolutely cashed in on that. And so when he says that they are blind to what they cannot measure, there are so many people that have left this franchise because of how Activision is running things, but because of how many whales there are out there, Activision doesn't even realize that somebody like me, for example, you know, hypothetically, I quit playing the COD franchise tomorrow, I shut down my YouTube channel and I'm gone forever, you never hear from me again. They lose a player who has purchased and played every single COD from 2007 to 2025. And back when we had those map packs and season passes, I purchased every map pack, every season pass. I would get the battle passes when they first came out and they were first being implemented. Like I was one of those people, and I'm sure many of you out there are as well, who kind of helped build the COD franchise. Not to say like it was all me or whatever, but I was one of those people, or people like us who played the older games, enjoyed the older games, loved the older games, even made content around them and everything. We were part of the reason why Call of Duty blew up in the first place. And for Activision to kind of view us as these things that they cannot measure, and when we leave the franchise after all these years, they don't even care. That's just how that works. They don't care because we will be replaced and they're just going to make more money because I'm somebody who doesn't buy microtransactions. In fact, they'd probably be pretty happy if I quit covering the COD series here on my channel. They'd probably be pretty happy to have that NerosCinema thorn in their side just taken out. But you know what, Activision? It's never going to fucking happen, man. I'm going to be a thorn in your side as long as humanly possible here on YouTube and use what little platform I have to advocate good change here for the Call of Duty franchise, because unlike the people that are making the game these days, I still love this franchise and I want what's best for it. And I remember when Call of Duty used to be good. I mean, for crying out loud, the optics here, the dude who made skill-based matchmaking, all he cares about is player retention, audience retention, all that bullshit, didn't even know that player numbers were displayed in the golden era Call of Duty games. Like, it hurts, man. It hurts my brain to even comprehend that these are the people making Call of Duty now. It's actually pretty freaking mind-blowing. But going back to it here, there are a number of bullet points because I sat through this hour-long podcast and Charlie did make some good points here and there, but most of it was like dodging questions, to be honest. Like I talked about initially, right? The initial interview that Charlie Olson did with Tom Henderson that was posted to Insider Gaming. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. In my video covering that, I said he kind of spoke out of both sides of his mouth on a number of issues, and he did that here today as well. So I do want to quickly cover some headlines, some bullet points, if you will, of things they discussed throughout the podcast. Number A, he claims that skill-based matchmaking is truly what they do in the Call of Duty franchise. It's not engagement optimized matchmaking like they do at Marvel Rivals. He completely believes the white pages Activision put out, and he believes that we perceive things as engagement optimized matchmaking because of how volatile the matchmaking system can be. He's claiming it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he claims it's strictly skill-based matchmaking, not engagement optimized matchmaking. Number B, he claims that X-Defiant was going to fail regardless of whether or not it had skill-based matchmaking. He believes that if they are going to make their entire selling point for the game that they don't have skill-based matchmaking, that they probably should have charged people $20 for it because they would have been more invested from the get-go. But I just think that's kind of a bad take because overall, X-Defiant, as much as I love it, if you charged for that game, it would have had even less players because the game was rushed, it was lacking features, it was lacking polish. Like, RAP X-Defiant, but charging for it would not have been a good idea. But it is interesting that he thinks that regardless of skill-based matchmaking existing or not, it would not have saved X-Defiant. Number C, he talked about there's lots of competition between the Call of Duty dev studios and competition between the games themselves. They used to use different engines, for example, and you wouldn't directly share assets between studios and between games because they were all just basically in competition with one another. Basically, every studio, even to this day, Infinity Ward, Sledgehammer Games, Treyarch, Raven Software, all of them, they all think they're the best at what they do, and they think that how their studio does things is the correct way, which is something we've actually seen an example of in recent years. Who remembers when Sledgehammer Games released Modern Warfare 3, the more current one, apparently they were going to be doing a whole bunch of things. They were going to bring back the Pick 10 system, for example, in multiplayer, but Infinity Ward said no, because basically Modern Warfare is an Infinity Ward IP, so for some reason Infinity Ward had some stake in what Sledgehammer was able to do with their game, and even down to things like the Cray class and the multiplayer. Doesn't make a ton of sense, but it just goes back to it. The different Call of Duty studios don't like working together, and they're not very good at it, and that's a big reason why when we have a really good quality of life feature in one game, it never makes it into the game after that. Something like the headquarters back in Call of Duty World War II could maybe be a staple COD feature that we have in every single title, but just because the studios are basically always at each other's throats, that will never happen, and that's freaking frustrating considering it's an annual game. And when we see something that's really good in one game, like for example the weekly challenges as well as the aftermarket parts and everything in Modern Warfare 3, well, it's annoying that we go into a game like Black Ops 6 and we don't have either of those things, essentially, because the studios just simply cannot work together. They're basically children, and it was interesting to hear Charlie talk about that. Number D, he still doubled down that ping is king within the Call of Duty franchise, but there are like 8 different variables when it comes to the matchmaking system, so it doesn't weigh in as heavily as it maybe used to back in the day. He claims that Activision themselves are suffering from having too many data setters, too many playlists, too many weights when it comes to their multiplayer experience, and that is why, while ping is technically still king, it doesn't feel like it because they have to weigh in all the things that you're seeing on your screen right now. Number 5, he talked about how you can't play with your friends anymore, and that's really interesting because Charlie thinks that the Call of Duty devs now are still using the max skill rating of a party member when putting your team into a match. So if you have somebody who's really good on your team, for example, let's say Scumpy is in your party, you are going to be playing in Scumpy lobbies, which is ridiculously frustrating because I can't play with my cousin, my brother can't play with his girlfriend, like basically any family members or people I really know in real life, I can't play COD with them because, let's be real here, I've been covering COD professionally here on YouTube for going on 14 years. I've been playing the series for like 18 years. You know, my level is a bit higher than theirs, you know, and when they try to play with me, they have no fun whatsoever because the game is deliberately matching them only in my lobbies, which means basically they get chewed up and spit out every single match, and it's not fun. Charlie said, and I like this part of the podcast actually, he said that that is bad for the brand overall, and the social aspect of COD is a big part of player retention and why people come back. You should be able to play with your friends, but fixing the situation is tricky because it adds yet another weight into their matchmaking factor, which he didn't talk about this, I'm going to talk about this. Who gives a shit about the matchmaking system and the matchmaking factor? Just get rid of it in general. There's all these things right here that determine your perfect skill-based matchmaking lobby. How about we just go back to ping being actually king? How about I can play video games with my cousin again for a change? And how about the Call of Duty franchise goes back to having player numbers like this as compared to having player numbers like this? That would be pretty freaking fantastic. And to wrap up the video here today, he talked about how the matchmaking system does not adapt quickly enough. And the example that he gave, and this is something that I personally felt, I'm sure many of you felt this as well, the example is using a pistol, right? You're going for dark matter and you have to use a bunch of pistols and get all your camos and your headshots and everything like that. And as a result, you are not going to do as well as you normally would if you had a submachine gun, a rifle, or basically anything else, man. It's a freaking pistol. So the idea is the matchmaking system is going to adapt to what you're doing currently and lower your skill rating based on your recent performance. So eventually you'll get into easier lobbies to do your pistol challenges, right? It just kind of makes sense. Well, no, it doesn't. It's asinine, actually, and let me explain why. Number A, knowing damn well going into a match that you will be expected to carry with a pistol and will be expected to do so for several matches after that is frustrating as hell. The fourth wall is broken, man. Like, you know what's happening. The game is literally screwing you over because it knows how good you are normally, and it doesn't take into account what weapon you're currently using. And number B, in a world without skill-based matchmaking, believe it or not, come closer here, guys, good players can survive with just a pistol. Like, you may not be dropping streaks or anything like that or going crazy, but you can do just fine with a pistol in a world where the enemy team isn't handpicked by Activision to completely screw you over. Trying to do something like pistol or launcher challenges when the other team is full of CDL skin Jackal users is annoying enough, but knowing damn well that they did not just show up there organically, but rather the matchmaking system deliberately put them there is a fucking insult. And to Charlie's point, the system does not update quickly enough to adapt to your current setup or your current situation. So essentially, if you start working on pistol challenges, you're stuck doing that and having to carry these normal lobbies for 5, 10, 15 straight matches before eventually the system throws you a bone. And that's why nobody cares, man. Nobody cares anymore. Like, everybody just goes off the face-off, they turn off their brains, and that is it. There's a reason why people basically only played Shipment 24/7 for the past 5 years, ever since skill-based matchmaking was implemented, and there's a reason why virtually every single clip you see on Reddit or social media or whatever is just stakeout, man. That's it. Like, I understand it's natural for people to choose the path of least resistance when it comes to a video game, but the important takeaway here is the community does not care about actually playing the game. They are just jumping in to a mindless meat grinder, and that is what Call of Duty is to them. As compared to back in the day, we did everything on normal COD maps, and we were able to do so because the matchmaking was organic. Ping was not only king, but it was essentially the only weight being measured for matchmaking. And you know what? The player numbers were through the roof back then. And I'm not trying to say we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways or whatever, but seriously, like, we would have Nuketown 24/7 playlists, and that was cool, and we would utilize them. But in general, we enjoyed playing the actual multiplayer on all the maps. Well, most of the maps. Some of them sucked, but on the normal, large-ish maps, like, people were actually able to experience COD and play COD and develop those rivalries and friendships and get better at the game and everything about it was so organic as compared to now, where nothing is organic. It's all artificial. Nobody plays the actual game. They all just play Shipment 24/7. They all just play face-off. And guys, I'm starting to get a headache even talking about this anymore. Like, the disconnect between Activision and their employees and the hardcore Call of Duty fan base is ridiculous at this point. It's not even a gap anymore. It's a chasm, for crying out loud. And it was interesting to hear some of Charlie's takes. Again, I'll put a link to the full podcast down there in the description if you guys want to check it out. I mean, it's an hour of your time, and some good points and some good questions are answered, but a bunch of other questions are also completely dodged. Like, for example, at the end of the podcast, there was supposed to be a section where they answer community questions that were submitted via the Insider Gaming forums, but there was a technical issue with the podcast, so Charlie's gonna have to come back a few weeks later and maybe answer those questions. Seems a little iffy to me personally, but I trust Tom Henderson, and Tom did push back a little bit on some of those things and bring up some more uncomfortable questions as well. So I think Tom did a pretty good job. Overall, it was a good listen. It was interesting, albeit frustrating at times. So yeah, once again, link to the full podcast down there in the description. And for right now, I'm just gonna wrap up this video here today, guys. I could just keep going on and on, but I'm gonna wrap it up here. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about everything discussed today down there in the comments. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you for continued support of my channel, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.